Next on Book TV, Columbia University Earth Institute Director Jeffrey Sachs details his plan to rid the world of poverty by the year 2025. His new book is The End of Poverty, and he spoke about it recently at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. for about an hour, 15 minutes.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin this very exciting session by, first of all, thanking the Info Shop and the Public Information Center for creating a supply of exciting events for us all through the year, of which today's event is promising to be one of the most exciting and inspiring that you will remember in this series. I also want to thank you for joining us to hear the remarks from Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who has been hailed by the Time magazine as one of the world's most influential people. We will also have a chance to hear some comments about Dr. Sachs' book from Dr. Zia Qureshi, who is well on his way to be one of the most influential people. Thanks to the pioneering work he is doing as the lead author of the global monitoring reports, which are becoming a point of reference on the MDGs around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, as we entered the 21st century, the development community was converging on two broad conclusions regarding the state of the world. First, studies were showing that over the past 50 years, there has been more progress in reducing poverty and improving living conditions in developing countries than at any other time in history. Second major conclusion, as highlighted by Mr. Wolfenson in his annual meeting speech, is that at present, growth patterns, the world is growing out of balance socially and environmentally, and bold actions by both rich and poorer nations will be necessary. We are fortunate today to have one of the leading advocates of such bold action. In writing the book, The End of Poverty, as well as heading the Millennium Project Task Force, Dr. Sachs has proposed a global compact to end the plight of the world's poorest people who number more than 1 billion. I am supposed to introduce him, though he needs no introduction. Let me just read a few sentences which are in the words of the managing editor of the Time magazine, and which are said in the last week's Time magazine. And as you will know, Dr. Sachs in his book and his thoughts are on the cover of the Time magazine of the last week. I quote, Dr. Sachs is one of the world's most distinguished economists, a man who has guided countries from Bolivia to Poland through bad financial times, advised the Pope on third world debt relief, and helped launch the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. As head of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, he has tried to promote the idea that developing countries can protect the environment while improving the lives of their citizens. We are truly honored, that's the end of the quote, we are truly honored to have Dr. Sachs here. Dr. Sachs, for your remarks, please.
Thank you, Vinay, for the lovely introduction, and thanks to all of you, first for coming here, and a special thanks to all of you at the bank for what you do every day. If we're going to end poverty, which we can do, it will be in no small reason for the fact of the bank's leadership. And a vigorous and strong World Bank is absolutely one of the most urgent needs of our planet. And I want to salute you for what you do. I also want to salute Jim Wolfenson for a remarkable tenure, which in my view has been historic in one central way, and in many other ways as well, but in one central way, and that is helping the bank to emerge from what, looking back, I think was a failed era of structural adjustment into an era of real poverty fighting and real need and concern and direction and dedication for the world's poorest people. In all, the bank is not the master of its own fate, we know. The staff and the professionalism are unparalleled, but it is the leadership of all of the member states, and some even more than others, that determine how things happen. And we're meeting this morning at one of the true crossroads, not only for the bank, but for the world. That's a cliche often used, but I think it's true in 2005. 2005 has long been looked at as the make or break year for the fight against poverty. The Millennium Development Goals were set 5 years ago. They are not being achieved in dozens of countries around the world. The very poorest, and this is the last chance we have, really, to get them on track. That's why a tremendous political effort is underway, starting in some small way with the Millennium Project, and I thank my wonderful colleagues for the remarkable work they did on that. But with the Africa Commission, with the Secretary General's report yesterday, with Prime Minister Tony Blair and Chancellor Gordon Brown's commitment that the G8 summit will center on the issue of extreme poverty, the Millennium Goals, development finance, and with the summit that will come in September 2005, probably the biggest gathering of world leaders in the history of the world. If we don't make it this year, we're not going to make it. And so the fact that this is such a pivotal year and a pivotal moment for the bank when it's making a transition to a new president is an astounding time for us to be together and to be talking about these issues. It's not a game we're in, as all of you know very well. It's not a casual activity. It's not just a daily job. The fate, truly, of hundreds of millions of people who are living at the edge of survival, and millions that are dying every year because they are too poor to stay alive, will depend on the decisions that are made. I've seen a lot of people dying in front of my eyes in recent years. AIDS, TB, malaria, all preventable and treatable diseases. But people are too poor to stay alive. And somehow the world has organized itself in such a way that it doesn't see these people. And they die nonetheless every day. Congress somehow can have a special session for a woman in a permanent vegetative state on the same day when 20,000 children will die of completely preventable reasons without knowing or caring or lifting a finger, apparently. Maybe caring is not fair, but without taking the effort to even understand the most basic facts of our planet and doing something about them. It's a disgrace how we live in this world with so much suffering unattended to. And the book that I've written and the efforts that I'm trying to do, and together with many, many people in this institution, is to try to show what we can do if we put our minds to it. It's actually the stunning fact is we don't need heroism to solve these problems. We don't actually need to tithe our incomes. You know, what's really needed is so incredibly small from us that it is simply almost unimaginable how much effort my own country takes to run away from responsibility. Because to actually carry through would be such a tiny thing if this were only understood. So I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that this paradox of our time is that the billion that are living at the edge and the millions that are dying, that we have it within our power, our generation, our time, real time, not only to achieve the goal of having poverty by 2015, but to achieve the goal of ending extreme poverty by 2025. I hope I won't put Martin Ravalian out of business for doing that. He's the keeper of the accounts. But it'll be a great day when Martin can say, we no longer have the $1 a day poverty. It's over. And that's essentially what we can accomplish. But I have to underscore more than anything else today, it won't happen by itself, and it is not happening now. I was charged by the Secretary General with trying to identify ways, together with 265 colleagues, ways to actually achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Our conclusion is the goals can be achieved, but I would also tell you the fact of the goals, in my view, has changed nothing up until now. The goals are not operational. The goals are not making a difference. The goals are being achieved in some places and not being achieved in other places, but not because there are goals. The system has not changed. The rich countries have not partnered with the poor to solve these problems. We've barely deflected the needle. The face of extreme poverty is real. It should always be kept in our minds. Please, wherever you go, make sure you go to the village. And when you're there, make sure you go to the clinic and the water hole. And make sure you talk to the people to understand what their lives are about now. This woman who we met in Malawi outside of Lilongwe in 2002 and who opens the book is a grandmother raising 15 orphaned grandchildren. All her children have died of AIDS. She's the living face of the AIDS pandemic together with her grandchildren. The villages of Africa are orphanages. AIDS is a treatable disease. The drugs now cost 30 cents a day. Millions of Africans will die this year because they have no access to these medicines. How fast are we moving? Is this an emergency? Every one of those children shown there will have gotten malaria this year because this woman lives in a holoendemic malarious environment. Maybe some of those children are already dead. The day we were there, the woman recounted that the previous week she had carried the young girl in olive there in front on her back 10 kilometers to a clinic. The girl was in malarious fever. There is no clinic in the village. Most of Africa does not have clinics in villages because public health is $3 or $4 per capita. And you're signing those programs and the board is approving them, and this is somehow taken as normal. And the IMF is setting budget ceilings, and this is somehow taken as normal. So the woman walked 10 kilometers, only to find, as is often the case, that there was no quinine available. She walked back 10 kilometers, carrying her feverish granddaughter on her back. And the girl survived the night. And she carried her back again the next morning. And there was quinine this time. And an IV was started, and the girl was saved. Around 3 million children will die this year. Malaria is 100% curable. And around 3 million children will die this year because they won't get the medicine, because not one of those children is sleeping under an insecticide-treated net, even though it's been shown repeatedly that such an investment can reduce all-cause mortality of children under 5 by 40%. We can't even get the nets to the villages the way we're acting right now. Let me show you another site, a sub-district hospital. Catchment, 200,000 people, Western Kenya, on a light day. A light day means only 2 people to a bed. It puts a new definition on what a ward is. A non-private ward means you're sharing a bed with someone with tuberculosis. I saw in the last visit AIDS, malaria, and TB patients all on the same bed. Strangers, head to toe, people on the floor on a piece of cardboard. We call this civilization. This is what extreme poverty is. The AIDS patient shouldn't even be there. They should be outpatient on antiretroviral therapy. The malaria patient wouldn't be there if they were sleeping under bed nets, at least with good probability. The hospitals are completely understaffed. One nurse may look after 60 or 70 or 80 patients. And I've tried for 2 years to get donors to give more funding to hire the 4,000 qualified nurses in Kenya that are unemployed because an IMF World Bank supervised program puts a budget ceiling on, and no donor has stepped forward to ease the budget constraint. And when I wrote to the bank actually last year, I have to confess, the answer I got back was, well, we're not sure that the $6 per capita per year in Kenya is being efficiently managed. There is no way in the world, ladies and gentlemen, to efficiently manage a public health system at $6 per person per year. This is a tragedy which screams out for relief, not a system to manage at $6 per capita. It's a disgrace. This is in the local village near that sub-district hospital, one of the improved water sites. It will go in your data as access to improved water. You can tell that because there are 5 stones there. This is a natural spring. By the late afternoon, it's probably biologically poisoned to drink. It gets turbid by late afternoon, and this is where water is collected in Sauri sublocation. Nyanza province, western Kenya. And this is what I saw last week, 2 weeks ago. I'll tell you in a minute what I saw last week. This is actually one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen. This is a riverbed. This is men digging in the middle of a dry riverbed. This is in Tigray province, Ethiopia. The rains in the short season have failed 5 years in a row now. Probably Sahelian precipitation decline because of long-term climate change associated with the warming of the sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean. Because what's happening here is what's happening in Darfur, it's what's happening in Somalia, it's what's happening in Chad, Niger. There's been a chronic decline of rainfall over the whole Sahelian system, probably because of anthropogenic climate change induced by us. Whatever the cause, the rains have failed, and what is called the perennial river of this village doesn't have water in it anymore. So the men were out this morning digging a hole in the middle of the riverbed to get to the water table. These people are struggling for survival. I read the IMF program on Ethiopia. The authorities were praised for their good macroeconomic management. The deaths and hunger of these people were not recorded. I show these pictures because they're the reality of our age and our time. They are the face of extreme poverty, but they're also a provocation to us because every one of these problems is directly solvable. Not by privatization of the next sugar mill, mind you. Not by proper domestic credit expansion budgetary management. Not by some, yet again, new civil service reform. But by investments in the basic needs of the poorest of the poor. I have yet to see an IMF, PRGF, or staff assessment mention the word malaria in the last decade. I have yet to see the idea that we should be investing perhaps in bed nets to keep people alive and scrutinizing the budget. I have yet to see the budgets to ensure that boreholes, rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, other management techniques in semi-arid and arid and subhumid environments are properly invested in. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, if you do a proper diagnosis of what ails the poorest of the poor people, it's quite clear that they need core investments in health, in education, in nutrition, in family planning, in their soils, water, sanitation, reversal of land degradation, roads, transport, power, and communications. It's not hard. They need the tools, first, to stay alive, and second, to be productive enough to be part of the world economy. All the privatizations in the world are not going to rescue these people. The markets are not going to come to rescue these people. The markets attend to people that have something. The markets do not attend to people that have no market demand because they don't even grow enough food to feed themselves, much less to bring to the market. Hundreds of millions of people are living on farm plots whose soils are so depleted of nutrients they are biophysically unable to produce food, and we're cutting subsidies for fertilizer. This is preposterous. We have to be investing in soil nutrients, not investing in soil nutrient mining. We have to understand that the barrier to fertilizer is extreme poverty, not the parastatal. We have to understand that the barrier to a bed net is that the household has no money. Last week, incidentally, I was in Dakar, just a week after being in Ethiopia, and I was outside of the city in a village, and I was taken to a USAID project on malaria bed nets that they were very proud of. I don't know why they were proud of it. It was a shame. 7,000 people. They have succeeded in selling 400 nets to these people in 3 years. What are they doing trying to sell bed nets to impoverished people? I do not know. We came to drop off for free 3,000 bed nets through a donation of Sumitomo Chemical Company, which produces the nets. We should be dropping off, by our estimates, 75 million nets each year in Africa in the next 4 years to get coverage so that every child in a malarious region and their parents can sleep under a long-lasting insecticide-treated net. We can do this. But if we persist in trying to sell things to people who have no money, we will not do this. So let me turn finally back to us. Back to us in 2005 and gazing forward to 2015 and 2025. We should set ourselves some targets. We've set ourselves a goal for 2015, the Millennium Development Goals. Let's hold ourselves accountable. The bank can and should and needs to be in the forefront of the great challenge and the achievable objective of success in the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. Let's together, our generation, we're the development practitioners. Let's set ourselves the goal of working with the poorest people in the world so that by 2025, we can be done with this kind of poverty that kills by practical and proven investments in their well-being, in their infrastructure, and in their environment. For this to happen, your energies are essential, and the leadership of this bank is fundamental. And herein lies the great question: what is the next leadership of the bank going to mean? We don't know. We have one nomination of a person with no experience in development and absolutely no clarity of what it means. And more distressing for me, the richest and most powerful country in the world, my country, the United States, currently stands outside of the global consensus on development. I believe it to be the case. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I believe it to be the case that President George Bush has not once uttered the phrase Millennium Development Goals in his presidency. The United States government, as a matter of policy, does not refer to the Millennium Development Goals. The United States does not subscribe to the target 0.7% of gross national product in official development assistance, even though it has signed up to it repeatedly. So it subscribes to it on paper, and then it pretends that it never did so. I'm told repeatedly by the US administration that they subscribe not to aid but to the Monterey Consensus. My advice to the Bush administration is read the Monterey Consensus. In paragraph 42, it says, "We urge developed countries that have not done so to make concrete efforts towards the target of 0.7% as official development assistance." 0.7% of gross national product as official development assistance. The U.S. signed up. President Bush was there personally. Every country has signed up. Secretary General Kofi Annan yesterday, in his appeal to the world, and it is an eloquent and moving and powerful appeal, said we will not have security without development, and we will not have development without security. It is incumbent on all countries to be part of a shared global agenda of development and security. And all donor countries should reach 0.7% of gross national product by 2015. It didn't say all countries except the United States. It said all donor countries should reach 0.7% of gross national product. The United States subscribes, it seems, to privatization without restraint often, without the control and the guarantee of universal access of the poorest people to basic needs. User fees, privatized health, privatized education. When our commitment in the world as a matter of human rights and as a matter of Millennium Development Goals and as a matter of fighting poverty is to ensure universal access, even for the poorest of the poor, to health and education and water and sanitation and other life-saving needs. Well, I read the Articles of Agreement again yesterday and today and actually the day before. I just kept checking how it is that the World Bank president gets picked. And the way that it gets picked is by a vote of the executive directors. And what I'm asking the executive directors on behalf of the world is to ask all candidates, Mr. Wolfowitz and any others that may come, some basic questions and public questions. Do you believe in the Millennium Development Goals? Will the Millennium Development Goals be the operational targets for the World Bank? Do you believe in the target 0.7% of GNP and official development assistance for all donor countries, as is stated in Monterey? Are you concerned that the United States is at 0.15%, the lowest level of official development assistance of any donor country in the world? Will you, whoever it is, call upon the U.S. as the largest economy in the world to reach 0.7% in official development assistance by the year 2015? As the Secretary General, as Tony Blair, as Gordon Brown, as other world leaders have said? Do you believe in guaranteed access to essential services for health, education, nutrition, family planning, social security? Or are these to be privatized by the World Bank? We can't let these opportunities pass because we're going to log roll of who heads this institution and who heads this institution. We can't treat this as a game, as a joke, as a fait accompli. It's not our choice. we're not here speaking for ourselves. We're here speaking for the voiceless in the world's most powerless people, the people for whom the answers to those questions are a matter of life and death, not a matter of convenience. There is no ducking the responsibility right now for a full and open vetting and due diligence for one of the most important positions as head of one of the most important institutions in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, together we can end poverty, but we have to decide to do it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. And we will have brief remarks by Zia, and then we will open it up for some questions and answers from the floor. Zia, please.
Thank you, Vinay. This is, needless to say, a hard act to follow. Bono says in his foreword to Jeffrey Sachs's book that whenever at events he had to go after Jeff, it was like, in his words, the monkeys going on after the Beatles. If Bono felt like that, imagine my plight. Bono says Jeff's voice is louder than any electric guitar, heavier than heavy metal. His passion is operatic. How very true from what we just heard. And this after he has spoken already for about an hour at a meeting which immediately preceded this meeting. So making virtue out of necessity, I'll be brief, so that I don't stand between you and him for long and leave plenty of time for you to ask questions of him. In this important year for development, 5 years after the adoption of the Millennium Declaration, when the world is taking stock of progress toward the MDGs, which overall has been slow and uneven, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and when the world is discussing how to accelerate progress, Jeff's contribution to that debate stands out. Regardless of whether one agrees with what Jeff says, and many do agree with what he says, his contribution must be recognized. In his advocacy, passionate advocacy of scaling up development, Jeff has been the goad and the gadfly of the development debate, stimulating, forcing others to think outside the box, pushing the envelope, and making others consider or take actions that they perhaps would not have, not to the same measure at least, if left to their own devices. The Bretton Woods institutions included, if I may say so. Jeff Sachs's new book, The End of Poverty, Economic Possibilities for Our Time, that we gather here to celebrate, is an inspired and inspiring piece of work, a tour de force. It is written with passion, conviction, and courage that are Jeff's hallmark. Its scope, the range of issues it deals with, is breathtaking, spanning the whole gamut of economic development and related political phenomena, and attesting to Jeff's versatility as an economist. It also attests to another rather rare strength that Jeff has, his ability to reduce complex technical phenomena to simple language that a layman can follow. Jeff belongs to a very select group of economists who know well both the science of economics and the art of storytelling. Read the very first chapter of the book and the story of poor families in Malawi to see what I mean. The book's main thesis is that the eradication of extreme poverty is a difficult but solvable equation, that it is a goal that is achievable in the lifetime of this generation. It also argues that the eradication of extreme poverty is not only a moral imperative, but is in the collective interest of all of us, rich and poor countries. The book's clarion call to end extreme poverty is one that the world community should respond to and rally around. The path to the eradication of extreme poverty that is laid out in the book in terms of strategies, policies, and actions by poor countries, by rich countries, is one that we broadly share. It has a lot in common with the agenda we have advocated for the achievement of the MDGs, for example, in our global monitoring reports. The mutual accountability of the poor and rich countries in the quest for the MDGs that the book stresses is indeed the essence of the Monterey Consensus. While supportive of the thrust of the book's argument and the agenda it lays out, I think there are parts where a somewhat different emphasis or balance would perhaps have been more appropriate. Economic growth is central to poverty reduction, and it is the private sector that drives economic growth, though government, of course, has a vital role in creating a climate conducive to private entrepreneurship. While the book, of course, addresses the issue of economic growth, at places in the book, the central role of growth, private sector-led growth, does not seem to come out as clearly and strongly and as integral to the overall strategy presented as perhaps it should. The argument in the book at times relies quite heavily on the existence of poverty traps in poor countries and the implied need for a big push in public investment, largely funded by foreign aid, to enable poor countries to escape those traps. Empirical evidence in support of poverty traps is, at best, inconclusive. And large infusions of capital by themselves do not constitute a growth strategy. Witness, for example, the failure of some resource-rich countries to translate large revenue inflows into sustainable growth. Substantial increases in aid are, of course, needed in many poor countries, and the World Bank is a strong advocate of that. But to be effective, increases in aid must be part of a broader development strategy that includes improvements in domestic policies and governance as equally, if not more important elements. Improvements in governance and institutional implementation capacities are crucial to effective use of resources, domestic and foreign. The book recognizes that, of course, but in places seems to underplay the role of governance, as, for example, in the chapter entitled Myths and Magic Bullets, where the view that weak governance and corruption are part of the reason for the poor economic performance of a number of African countries seems to be treated as a myth. The argument is made that governance in Africa, on average, isn't low when seen in relation to the region's low level of income. Such simple correlations between income levels and governance can be misleading. the causality between income and governance runs both ways. Higher income levels tend to support better governance, but better governance contributes to higher incomes. In general, the book articulates well what needs to be done. A substantial increase in foreign aid, for instance. Much more work, of course, will be needed at the country level on how to implement that agenda, how to align increases in development aid with country implementation capacities, and how to build those capacities. But in sum, the book succeeds gloriously in its core mission, calling for a war on poverty, a winnable war. Congratulations, Jeff, on this major contribution to the development debate. Your book is a considerable achievement. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Zia, and I think Professor Sachs has agreed that he will be available for another 20 minutes or so to take some questions from the floor. And we'll collect 4 or 5 questions, and then he would respond to those as well as they comment some of the thoughts made by Zia. And then immediately after the question and answer session, we have a reception outside where you will have a chance to have a personal interaction with Professor Sachs. So let me start by recognizing 4 or 5 persons for questions, and then we'll go. I usually start with people at the back of the room, so if there are any hands there, we'll start from there and then take also from the front. Okay. All right, I see 2 hands at the back. Yes, please use the microphone. Yes, yes. Ready here, and then the gentleman at the back is number 2, and then we'll come in the front.
Could I also ask each person to identify themselves?
Yes,
Yeah,
surely.
thanks.
Yes, my name is Anna Goldman. I am not an employee of the World Bank, but came purely out of my deep interest in this topic. And I wish to thank you, Dr. Sachs, for your very moving, and I might add, fearless address today. My questions are 2. Number 1, in the event of the availability of large private capital becoming available, to whom would such parties contact? Okay, second question. Let us say, for example, correct. Okay. Secondly, and just using a simple example, were a private entity to make available sufficient capital to supply an entire country with the insecticide impregnated nets to prevent malaria, what methodology would be used to ensure the distribution of those nets and that they in fact reach the intended recipients? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Morning. Thanks for the presentation. My name is Andrew Nhlapo from South Africa. I'm not with the bank. I'm with the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa. I have quite a few questions, but the first question is related to corruption and governance. The main issue here is about the co-conspirators, where you find that in the developing countries, particularly as it was referred earlier, the mineral resource-rich countries, where you find that some few corrupt individuals take the money out to the rich countries, and the rich countries actually collaborate to keep the money there. We have several cases and several names up to date, and nothing is done about that. So I just want to know, as in, what would be, if you like, the actions that can be taken by the rich countries, including institutions such as the World Bank or the UN for that matter. The next question is about the issue of whether or not do we have the, if you like, the correct institutions from the bank to the IMF to the UN, as in to look into development. The last question is accessibility to the G8 markets in terms of accessibility for beneficiated products from the developing countries. Is it enough? Are we doing the right job? Thanks.
Thank you very much for very straightforward and brief questions. Let me see. Lady in the front, please. Yeah, please go ahead. Microphone, yes. Yeah, go ahead. Use the one right behind you.
Okay, my name is Itamanna Toko. I'm from Botswana. I'm based with the World Bank Executive Director's Office, African ED. First, I'd like to thank Professor Sachs for his voice. I'm thanking him the second time. I think this message is very important. I have 3 questions, but the first one I'd like, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this too.
If you could just be directly to the question and as brief as you can be, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Qureshi whether, regarding his comment on the poverty trap, in my experience, but this is just through personal observation, there are countries where you can see and recognize a cycle of poverty, an entrenched cycle of poverty. Now, my question is, if this argument doesn't hold, I know economists will like getting locked into intellectual debates, but does the bank have an alternative argument to explain what is happening in those countries? Is there an alternative thesis that can be traced through to make a convincing argument? Regarding, I also wanted to ask Professor Sachs to speak a bit about the importance of delivery speed if the MDGs are to be achieved, basically primarily in infrastructure. Maybe from your experience on the ground, you can give us some insights on how delivery speed can be enhanced. And the third question is really about macroeconomic policies. It's a basic question, when is monetary policy good? About 73%, I think the last analysis was, of sub-Saharan African countries have been ranked as having good monetary policy. Real interest rates in sub-Saharan Africa, at least according to ECA, are about 25% real interest rates. Now, how is the investment that is going to generate growth? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let's have one more question, and then we'll come in the second round, please. I do see a hand over here, so I recognize you, but please go ahead. And then we will have responses from Dr. Sachs and also Zia.
My name is Amy Lin, and I do work for the World Bank. My question is about whether you could address the Millennium Challenge accounts and the effectiveness of providing aid through those that methodology, especially with the emphasis on good governance.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for your responses, please.
Thanks to all of you, and especially to Zia for the kind words and the pithy observations. Let me speak about implementation briefly, because a lot of the questions went to that. I'm a big fan of PRSPs if they are properly based in real goals, monitorable targets, and enough ambition to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. So I believe that the PRSP, or what we call MDG-based poverty reduction strategies, or it could be MDG-based national development plans for countries that don't literally have a PRSP, is the right framework to start. I am so far from asking to give a blank check to countries. I'm on the other end of the extreme. What I want to do is to help empower countries to make plans that can really work. The real life of poor countries is being told by donors, don't think so big. Most PRSPs get the stuffing knocked out of them by the time they come to Washington. It's not stuffing, only in polite company. what's happening is that countries come in and they have a plan, they have a vision. We actually need roads, we need electricity, we need water, all these outlandish needs, you know? And then the donors sit down with them and say, well, you don't actually have money for roads and electricity and all those things, so let's talk about policy reform. This is real life. There's a budget constraint when you're impoverished. And you don't have enough to provide the investments in health, education, nutrition, family planning, soils, water and sanitation, land management, biodiversity preservation, roads, transport, power, and communications. I'll go through the list again if you want. Those are the basics of what you need for economic development. The private sector is great. If you don't have electricity, don't dream about it. If you don't have a road to the port, don't dream about foreign direct investment. It ain't coming. Except if you happen to have an oil well in the middle of your country. Then they'll build a pipeline. But if you don't have a road and power and safe drinking water and a healthy population that isn't malarious, parasitemic all the time, don't dream about this wonderful private sector-led growth. And please understand also my own experience in this. You know, I was known for advocating private market reform. I'm kind of a believer in it, right? But when I got to Africa, it was a little bit different from being in Poland. In Poland, there were roads, there was electricity, there was running water, there wasn't malaria, there wasn't AIDS. What there was the Red Army and a bunch of dumb economics, and it needed to be ended through market reform. And when you work in Africa, there aren't roads to the village, there's no safe drinking water, everybody's sick, there's no clinics, the schools have no supplies, there's no electricity, and yet the programs were preaching the same thing that were preached in Poland: liberalization, stabilization, privatization. You know, in Poland they made sense because the issue was market reform. In Ethiopia, the issue is deep hunger, environmental degradation, pandemic disease, and don't dream about all this wonderful private sector-led growth. Yes, you know, if you changed the exchange rate system, as I advocated in Poland, Volkswagen or Asia Brown Boveri would come and invest. It's right next door, 50 miles away. You could reform the exchange rate system of Ethiopia up the wazoo, and they're not coming to invest there right now, because the railroad from Djibouti to Addis can't function properly, it's too rickety, because there is not reliable power, because transport costs are too high. And so we're living in mythology if we don't get the basics done first. And when the basics are done, then yes, you would expect foreign direct investment to come in. So I'm rambling a little bit. The point I'm trying to make is you need strategies that are clear investment programs, that are bold enough to actually accomplish something, that aren't hemmed in by development finance, which is about 1/3 to 1/4 of what it ought to be. And countries don't need to be told, don't dream about giving health to your people, which is what they're told right now. And they don't need to be told, please know what we do. You may, I'm sure you know, you get a situation which is desperate and it needs investment, and instead of investments, you say, let's improve the efficiency of this non-system. So when I tried to get 4,000 nurses hired for Kenya last year, actually the World Bank senior management told me, well, we're not sure that the $6 per capita is being properly invested. It was one of the worst letters I ever received. Because, again, a health system requires $40 or $50 per capita in most cases, at a minimum. And to be told, well, we can't really give more to Kenya because, you know, we're not sure that $6 is being properly invested. This is just like a death sentence, nothing more than that. So, implementation, let countries write honest plans. They're so ready for this. And you know how I know? Because they're all in the trash can, because they've been told to throw them out. The Ghana Poverty Reduction Strategy went through 4 drafts. The $8 billion draft, no. The $5 billion draft, no, too much. The $3.5 billion draft, no. The $2 billion draft, okay, now we're talking. That's how it went. Senegal's Plan Omega, the same thing, decimated. It's not our job to tell these countries your people can't survive. It's our job to tell the donors your policies are leading to mass death because you're not following through on your commitments. It's not the job I recount in the book a painful conversation I had, and I'm going to take just a minute because it was one of the most enlightening conversations I had in recent years, and it's described in the book. Prime Minister Meles and I, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, we made a presentation in 2003 about the MDGs in Ethiopia. For those of you who know Prime Minister Meles, first, he's brilliant. Second, he's got about the most incisive understanding of development that I know, and development in Ethiopia not might, the most by far. He's brilliant. And he's got concepts of how to actually scale up investments that are desperately needed in rural areas. So we made a presentation, and he gave a presentation about agricultural renovation in Ethiopia, which could not be more urgent. People are hungry, the environment is degraded, it's desperate. It's the people out there, I don't even know how to get this on anymore. Okay, it's the people out there digging the hole in the riverbed. So at the end of the session, somebody asked him from the audience, but Prime Minister, you spoke about agriculture, but what about health? And he said, to my surprise, well, health is going to have to wait. And that didn't sound like the Prime Minister that I know. So we went back to his office afterwards, and I said, Prime Minister, I was really surprised at your answer. I don't agree with it. Health can't wait. You can't get development with the life expectancy at 42 and so much illness anyway, aside from the tragedy. And he said, well, of course, but the IMF was here last week telling me that we couldn't do a health program. We have no money for health. And so I left Addis that day, and I flew back, and I called senior IMF management the next day. And my friend picked up the phone, said, Jeff, what are you complaining about today? And I said, today I'm complaining about Ethiopia. All right, what are you complaining about? I'm complaining about the IMF staff telling Ethiopia that there's no money for an expanded health program. Mind you, this is a country where the public health budget is $2 per person per year. I wish we had the time, because I could give you graphic details of what it means to live without a health system at all. Because I've seen it and I know it. So I said, and the answer was, but what do you want us to do about it? There's no donor money available. And I said, you know, this way Ethiopians are dying in mass numbers, and there's no way that they're going to reach the Millennium Development Goals. And the answer was, Jeff, there is no chance in the world Ethiopia is going to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. I was shocked, of course, to hear such a statement. And I said, you know, that is really wrong in one crucial sense. These goals are achievable. And the answer was yes, but there's no donor money available. What do you want us to do about it? And I said, well, why don't you go out and make a speech about it? The speech hasn't come, but it got me thinking about the difference of a US-led institution, a creditor-led institution, and a multilateral institution. Is the IMF and the World Bank, is it an institution run by its leading shareholder or holders to do what it does in poor countries, or is it, as I was grown up to believe, raised to believe, a multilateral institution of 184 member governments? Well, I firmly believe the latter. But of course, there's a tension here. The votes with the bucks, and the power is even more disproportionate, it seems sometimes. But the fact of the matter, for this institution to lead to the end of global poverty, which it must and can and will do, it has to be a multilateral institution. And the difference is that when the budget constraint is there, the job of the bank and the fund is not to tell countries stop dreaming. The job of the bank and the fund is to say we have shared global goals. They have been adopted by everybody. We are a multilateral institution. Our job is to promote shared global objectives. So to meet those objectives in Ethiopia, it's not to tell the Prime Minister you don't have money. It's to tell the United States and Europe and Japan, you must give more money to Ethiopia so it can achieve the goals we've all agreed. This is how we have to be in the years ahead. We have to be committed to the goals, not operating at the behest of the rich countries. This is a global institution. This is an institution for everybody. This is an institution that can be guided by shared, explicit objectives. And that's why the Millennium Development Goals are so absolutely essential. So the bottom line on implementation, let countries write real plans. Let's fund real plans. No blank checks. No money just to transfer. Money to support coherent, implementable, monitorable, auditable programs. But that is absolutely achievable if we set real targets. Let's measure what we're doing, but then hold ourselves accountable, as well as holding the recipient country accountable. Private philanthropy can contribute enormously to this in many ways. It's actually hard to summarize. But the answer is that through many mechanisms, I would, again, similar with the public official development assistance, you would give large-scale funding on the basis of a coherent national plan of action. Those exist, they sit on shelves, they can be made real, and they should be made real, but they require the financing to do it. Large philanthropy could help get bed nets everywhere, and I've recently met with some major global corporations that are getting together to do this. Private philanthropy can help to ensure that all children have midday school meals. private philanthropy can help to ensure that all villages have safe drinking water, not 5 stones around a dirty spring. These are things that private philanthropy can play a big role. In terms of the question, do we have the right institutions? I believe we do. But we have to have the right mandate for the institutions. The World Bank is, without question, the greatest repository of development knowledge in the world. It can lead this effort, but only with the clear mandate. It can't lead it as the American bank. It can't lead it as the rich country bank. It can only lead it as the World Bank. So the mandate has to be very clear, to let the professional advice tell the truth, and tell the truth to the rich and powerful, as well as to the poor and vulnerable. But the institutions can work. They've often been deeply misused. The IMF and the World Bank were the enforcement agencies during the structural adjustment era. That's what Jim Wolfenson ended by his leadership. You can't be the enforcement agencies. You have to be the representative of achieving the end of poverty. Then the empowerment of the institutions can be real. In terms of the private corruption, it's an extremely important point that it's 2 sides of the deal. We know in many sectors that it's the international side, which is absolutely co-conspirator with local forces. And there are many good ideas about this, like the Extractive Industries Initiative, like Publish What You Pay, to get transparency in key sectors. Oil and gas would be a great place to start, because we know that the current system ain't working. And so insisting on sectoral transparency and codes of conduct is actually a workable and very vital thing to do. But again, you know, history is written by the rich, and so the poor get blamed for everything. And what we have to do is open this up transparently to explain what's really happening. Finally, in terms of good macro policy, let me just explain my view on one thing. I am not a fan of inflation, and I'm not a fan of printing a lot of money through domestic finance. I got started in Bolivia working with Ronnie McLean to fight a hyperinflation. It stays with you for a long time. And so I don't believe in that the solution to these problems is easy domestic finance. I believe the solution to the problems is that the rich countries should help to finance this tiny amount, such a sliver of our incredible wealth, so that poor people can stay alive and get started on development. You know, it's interesting, by the way, and therefore, again, the IMF answer isn't to tell Ethiopia, well, just print money to finance the health sector. It's to tell the United States, Europe, and Japan, help pay for Ethiopia's health sector. That's what's really needed. And to cancel all of this debt of the low-income, highly indebted countries. I have a simple plan for the debt. I tell all the African leaders I can find, just stop paying. Take the creditors out of their misery. Because this has gone on long enough. The rich countries get together in all these meetings, the G7 deputies, they anguish. How are we going to finance this? Yes, we know it should be canceled. How are we going to finance it? How are we going to finance it? And in the meantime, the poorest countries of the world keep paying during all of this. So I think it's just too high anxiety for the creditors. And I would like to ease their struggle. And Finally, let me say a word before Zia about the poverty trap. The poverty trap is not a general theory of development. There are many places in the world that are not only not in a poverty trap, they're booming. Many poor places. Moreover, the poverty trap's not a general explanation for all impoverished places that are stuck. North Korea is not in a poverty trap. It's in a political debacle. It's in a policy debacle. That's different. Poland was not in a poverty trap. It had the Red Army occupying the country. That's different. But the point of the book is, let's keep our eyes open to realities and understand that just like you distrust a doctor that had one answer for everything, you ought to distrust an economist that has one answer for everything. And we got lots of one-answer economists. And the preeminent answer of our day is governance. That's the one answer for everything. This is baloney as a one answer. It has its role, but it is not the one answer for what ails the poorest places in the world. Nor is the poverty trap. You have to analyze. So where does the poverty trap exist? It exists in more geographically isolated places, like a Bolivia, or like a Nepal, or like a Mongolia, or like in Ethiopia, transport costs. It exists in places with intrinsically difficult physical environments for agriculture, rain-fed agriculture in the semi-arid tropics, for example, like the Sahel. It exists in places with massive disease endemicity. African malaria, and I've been studying this now as intensively as anything I've been doing for the last decade. African malaria is as bad as it is, not because Africans don't care, not even because of poverty, although with finance it could be addressed. It's as bad as it is because the vector ecology and the overall disease ecology is uniquely pernicious in Africa because of the combination of temperatures, breeding sites, and the specific species of Anopheles mosquitoes. And this is why the population genetics, why sickle cell anemia and other hemoglobin anemias, other hemoglobin anomalies, I should say, are so high in Africa, because well before there was public health, the burden of malaria in Africa was uniquely high. This is an ecological phenomenon. It can be controlled, but it is not something that came from bad governance. It came from bad mosquitoes. And this is very important to understand because it helps to lead to poverty traps. People so sick with such difficulties that they can't invest to their own health. So the point about poverty traps is diagnose the situation. Stop the global replace on these documents. Stop applauding the macroeconomic authorities' good resolve of reducing domestic credit expansion in every IMF document, and talk a little bit about reality so that the board understands something about the real situation of these countries as well. And that's what I call clinical economics in the book. Let's try to move beyond 17th century medicine, where we put the leeches on the patient, into good 21st century scientific development practice. Thanks.
Very much. We are running way over time, but I promised that we'll have one last round of questions, and there were...
Maybe we should just
maybe.
do a good reception.
All right. Well, I think our chief guest has spoken, so I would just like to end the session with Three quick thank yous and one promise. First of all, thank you to the Info Shop and the Public Information Center, Hafid and his team for organizing this event. Second thank you is to Zia for his remarks and thoughtful observations. And the third thank you is, of course, to Professor Sachs for inspiring us by just very forcefully telling us that poverty is real and horrifying. It can be ended. It is not being ended because of lack of action. And going forward, this is the year in which action can be taken, and we should all focus on that. Let me end with the promise to Professor Sachs. He commented on the issue of leadership at the World Bank. I have been here long enough to know that many staff, managers, and presidents of the World Bank have come to this institution without any development experience. But the record will show that we, staff, managers, and the past presidents have become passionate champions of poverty reduction and the cause and the mission of the bank. What changes them is the first encounter they have with the voices and faces of the poor. And this is my hope, no matter who the World Bank president is. That's the promise I want to make, that have faith in all of us, have faith in our mission and the cause, and we'll get there. Thank you very much for all being here.
Jeffrey Sachs is a professor of sustainable development and health policy at Columbia University. The End of Poverty is published by Penguin Press. Visit penguin.com for more information.